She rose with the sun and went out on the flat roof of her house, and a scene like one from Dante lay around her. For miles, in every direction, there was nothing but a black, glittering multitude. A multitude of rested, sated, but nonetheless voracious ants. Yes, look as far as one might, one could see nothing but that rustling black throng, except in the north, where the great river drew a boundary they could not hope to pass. But even the high stone breakwater along the bank of the river, which the Leiningens had built as a defense against inundations, was, like the paths, the shorn trees and shrubs, the ground itself, black with ants. So their greed was not glutted in raising that vast plantation? Not by a long shot. They were all the more eager now on a rich and certain booty. 400 men, 1 woman, numerous horses, and bursting granaries. At first it seemed that the petrol trench would serve its purpose. The besiegers sensed the peril of swimming in it, and made no move to plunge blindly over its brink. Instead, they devised a better maneuver. They began to collect shreds of bark, twigs, and dried leaves, and dropped these into the petrol. Everything green, which could have been similarly used, had long since been eaten. After a time, though, a long procession could be seen, bringing from the west the tamarind leaves used as rafts the day before. Since the petrol, unlike the water in the outer ditch, was perfectly still, the refuse stayed where it was thrown. It was several hours before the ants succeeded in covering an appreciable part of the surface. At length, however, they were ready to proceed to a direct attack. Their storm troops swarmed down the concrete side, scrambled over the supporting surface of twigs and leaves, and impelled these over the few remaining streaks of open petrol until they reached the other side. Then they began to climb up this to make straight for the helpless garrison. During the entire offensive, the planter sat peacefully, watching them with interest, but not stirring a muscle. Moreover, she had ordered her men not to disturb in any way whatsoever the advancing horde. So they squatted listlessly along the bank of the ditch and waited for a sign from the boss. The petrol was now covered with ants. A few had climbed the inner concrete wall and were scurrying towards the defenders. "Everyone back from the ditch!" roared Lady Leiningen. The men rushed away without the slightest idea of her plan. She stooped forward and cautiously dropped into the ditch a stone, which split the floating carpet and its living freight to reveal a gleaming patch of petrol. A match spurted, sank down to the oily surface. Lady Leiningen sprang back. In a flash, a towering rampart of fire encompassed the garrison. This spectacular and instant repulse threw the Indians into ecstasy. They applauded, yelled, and stamped. Had it not been for the awe in which they held the boss, they would infallibly have carried her shoulder high. It was some time before the petrol burned down to the bed of the ditch and the wall of smoke and flame began to lower. The ants had retreated in a wide circle from the devastation, and innumerable charred fragments along the outer bank showed that the flames had spread from the Holocaust in the ditch well into the ranks beyond, where they had wrought havoc far and wide. Yet the perseverance of the ants was by no means broken. Indeed, each setback seemed only to whet it. The concrete cooled. The flicker of the dying flames wavered and vanished. Petrol from the second tank poured into the ditch, and the ants marched forward anew to the attack. The foregoing scene repeated itself in every detail, except that on this occasion less time was needed to bridge the ditch, for the petrol was now already filmed by a layer of ash. Once again they withdrew. Once again petrol flowed into the ditch. Would the creatures never learn that their self-sacrifice was utterly senseless? It really was senseless, wasn't it? Yes, of course it was senseless, provided the defenders had an unlimited supply of petrol. When Lady Leiningen reached this stage of reasoning, she felt for the first time since the arrival of the ants that her confidence was deserting her. Her skin began to creep. She loosened her collar. Once the devils were over the trench, there wasn't a chance in hell for her and her men. God, what a prospect, to be eaten alive like that. For the third time, the flames immolated the attacking troops and burned down to extinction. Yet the ants were coming on again as if nothing had happened. And meanwhile, Lady Leiningen had made a discovery that chilled her to the bone. Petrol was no longer flowing into the ditch. Something must be blocking the outflow pipe of the third and last cistern. A snake? Or a dead rat? Whatever it was, the ants could be held off no longer unless petrol could by some method be led from the cistern into the ditch. Then Lady Leiningen remembered that in an outhouse nearby were 2 old disused fire engines. Spry as never before in their lives, the peons dragged them out of the shed, connected their pumps to the cistern, uncoiled, and laid the hose. They were just in time to aim a stream of petrol at a column of ants that had already crossed and drive them back down the incline into the ditch. Once more, an oily girdle surrounded the garrison. Once more, it was possible to hold the position. For the moment.